Am I the asshole for exposing my neighbor's dark secret? I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood, and for the past few months, I've been dealing with a growing sense of unease about my neighbor, Mr. Johnson. At first glance, he seemed like a typical middle-aged guy, friendly and always willing to lend a hand. But something was off, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. The trouble started when I noticed that my cat, Whiskers, was missing. I'd let him out as usual one morning, and he hadn't returned by evening. I asked around the neighborhood, and everyone said they hadn't seen him. That's when I remembered something peculiar about Mr. Johnson. He always had this odd collection of animal figurines in his garden, and it seemed to grow steadily over time. Birds, squirrels, rabbits, you name it, he had a porcelain version of it. I'd often see him outside, talking to these figurines in hushed tones. I thought it was harmless, maybe even a bit eccentric, but now I wasn't so sure. I began to suspect that Mr. Johnson had something to do with Whiskers' disappearance. Call it intuition, but I couldn't shake the feeling. So, one evening, I decided to snoop around his garden while he was out. What I found sent shivers down my spine. Beneath the neatly arranged figurines lay a macabre scene, small animal skeletons, carefully arranged in the shape of a pentagram. There were bones from various animals, and I knew they couldn't all be accidents. I couldn't believe my eyes. I confronted Mr. Johnson the next day, unable to contain my anger and fear. I accused him of harming animals, including my beloved Whiskers. He didn't deny it. Instead, he admitted that he had been collecting animal bones for some kind of dark ritual, believing it would bring him good fortune. Enraged and horrified, I didn't know what to do. I felt a moral obligation to expose his actions to the neighborhood, but doing so would ruin his reputation and potentially lead to legal consequences. My friends are now divided on whether I did the right thing. So, am I the asshole for exposing my neighbor's dark secret, potentially ruining his life, and causing turmoil in our once peaceful neighborhood? I can't help but feel like I did what had to be done, but the guilt and the rifts it's created among our neighbors weigh heavily on my conscience. TLDR, I exposed my neighbor's dark ritual involving animal bones after suspecting he had something to do with my missing cat. Now our neighborhood is in turmoil, and I'm wondering if I'm the asshole for doing it. Update. After confronting Mr. Johnson and uncovering his disturbing secret, I couldn't just let it slide. My conscience weighed heavy, and I decided to take action. I anonymously reported the situation to the local animal protection agency, hoping they would investigate and ensure no more animals were harmed. Within a few days, an investigation was launched, and officers paid Mr. Johnson a visit. He was questioned about the animal bones and his dark rituals. To my surprise, he confessed to everything during the investigation. He admitted to hurting animals, including my precious Whiskers, and performing strange rituals to seek good fortune. The consequences were swift. Mr. Johnson was charged with animal cruelty and faced a legal battle that would determine his fate. My actions had exposed a sinister side of our seemingly peaceful neighborhood, and my neighbors were both shocked and grateful. Some, like me, felt a moral duty had been fulfilled, while others still believed I should have handled the situation differently. As the legal proceedings continued, it became clear that Mr. Johnson needed psychological help. He agreed to undergo therapy, and his legal team negotiated a plea deal that included mandatory counseling and community service. The neighborhood began to heal from the disturbing revelation. People started locking their doors more securely, and an air of caution replaced the previous neighborly trust. Although some residents still held reservations about my decision to expose Mr. Johnson, most recognized the importance of keeping our community safe from harm. So, am I the asshole for exposing my neighbor's dark secret? The aftermath of my decision has been a mix of relief, shock, and division in our neighborhood. While it's clear that Mr. Johnson needed intervention, the way it all unfolded has left a lasting impact on our once close-knit community. Conclusion and judgment. Reflecting on the events that transpired in our once quiet neighborhood, it's time to weigh the actions taken and consider where I fall on the moral spectrum. In the world of r/am with asshole, judgments are often subjective and depend on the individual's perspective. In this case, it's a complex situation with varying degrees of right and wrong, and there are compelling arguments for different outcomes. First, let's consider the possible judgments. YTA, you're the asshole. This would imply that my actions were entirely unjustifiable, causing unnecessary harm to Mr. Johnson and the neighborhood without a valid reason. YWBTA, you would be the asshole. This suggests that while my actions had negative consequences, there might have been a better way to handle the situation, making my actions questionable but not outright condemnable. NTA, not the asshole. If I'm deemed not the asshole, it means my actions were justified, necessary, and morally right, considering the circumstances. YWNBTA, you would not be the asshole. This suggests that my actions were morally sound, given the circumstances, and there wasn't a better alternative. ESH, everyone sucks here. This judgment implies that both parties involved, myself and Mr. Johnson, share responsibility for the situation's negative outcomes. NAH, no assholes here. This implies that there was no right or wrong answer, and the situation was complex with no clear villain or victim. To determine where I fit into these categories, we need to revisit the circumstances and motivations behind my actions. When I confronted Mr. Johnson about the animal bones and his disturbing rituals, I did so out of genuine concern for the welfare of animals and the safety of our neighborhood. My initial suspicion that he might be involved in my cat's disappearance was based on his bizarre behavior and the peculiar collection of animal figurines in his garden. My intentions were not malicious. I wanted to ensure that no more animals suffered and that our community remained secure. In this light, it becomes evident that my actions were motivated by a sense of moral responsibility rather than a desire to harm or cause trouble. Exposing Mr. Johnson's actions led to his confession and subsequent intervention, which was necessary for the safety and well-being of animals and our community. However, it's essential to acknowledge that the situation was far from straightforward. My decision to report him to the Animal Protection Agency did have negative consequences for Mr. Johnson. He faced legal charges, community backlash, and the loss of trust from his neighbors. In an ideal world, there might have been a way to address the issue without these consequences. Yet, given Mr. Johnson's admission of guilt and the potential danger he posed to animals and possibly even people, taking action to ensure the authorities were aware of the situation seemed like the most responsible course of action at the time. While it's true that I could have approached him differently, perhaps talking to him without involving the authorities, his willingness to confess during the investigation validated my concerns. In the end, it's clear that my actions were motivated by a genuine desire to protect the well-being of animals and the safety of our neighborhood. While the outcome was not without its complexities and consequences, I believe that, in this context, I would fall under the category of NTA, not the asshole. The situation was unfortunate and difficult for everyone involved, but it ultimately led to a resolution where Mr. Johnson received the help he needed, and our community could begin to heal. The judgment of not the asshole recognizes the difficult decisions we sometimes have to make when faced with unsettling circumstances, prioritizing the greater good over personal discomfort. This story serves as a reminder that real-life situations don't always neatly fit into moral categories. Often, they are fraught with ambiguity and complexity, and judgments can vary depending on one's perspective. In this case, my actions were driven by a genuine concern for the well-being of others, and while they had consequences, they were not meant to harm but to protect. Then, this is the end of the video. See you next time. Thank you.